Yeah, welcome to the Zoom age. Well, I wonder, I'm going to be so curious to see to what extent we go back to actually having human interaction, actually, I mean, on one level, it's great because we get people from Israel, that are here. But
I promised Yoram that we're going to invite him once this ordeal ends. So.
Yes, Yoram, we want you here.
I'll be delighted to come.
Yeah. That would be.
To all our guests, welcome. We'll wait a few more minutes just to make sure that everyone join us, and because of the confusion that we had on the registration page. So a few more seconds.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with an announcement or two. We might as well sort of get that going. Hello to everyone who's here. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kathy Warner. Welcome to the Society for the Study of Religion's monthly seminar series. I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. On February 1st, we're going to have an all religious studies meeting from 3 to 4:30. And most of you should have gotten an email message with a link there for registration, and I would thank you for registering. If you didn't and you'd like to join us, everyone's welcome. It's on, please contact John Brockup and he'll send you the link. And that's once again on February 1st from 3 to 4:30. Our next Society for the Study of Religion meeting will be on February 18th, and that will be at 12:30. That actually will be at 12:30. That's a Thursday, and Yoti Barachan will be our speaker at that time. Our format for today, we'll have a presentation followed by discussants' comments, and then we'll open it up to question and answer for all of you. So perhaps, how about if should I introduce our speakers? Should we get started? What do you think, guys? That's all I've got.
Do we know how many are in?
Right now, 11.
I have 15. Oh, and the four of us, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose we.
You know what? You can go ahead and introduce.
Let's get launched anyway. So I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is Professor Emeritus Yoram Bilu, who is a professor of anthropology and psychology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He has written several books. I just cite the most recent before the one he'll be discussing today, and that's The Saints and Impresarios, Dreamers, Healers, and Holy Men in Israel's Urban Periphery. And the book before that was Without Bounds, The Life and Death of Rabbi Yaakov. The book that his talk today is taken from his most recent book, which I personally can highly recommend. Here it is, by the way. And it's from this book that the title of the talk today is taken. With Us More Than Ever, Making the Absent Rebbe Present in Messianic Chabad. And our comments after Professor Bilu's talk will be offered by Daniel Falk, who is the Chaikin Family Chair in Jewish Studies and the head of Classics and Ancient and Mediterranean Studies. And as I mentioned afterwards, we'll go to Q&A. So either you should feel free to send up a little hand or write something in the Q&A and I'll read your question. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Bilu.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be with you. It's really one of the miracles of Zoom that enables us to connect across the ocean. It's wonderful. So I'll be speaking shortly and quite informally. We have a select group of participants. So I'll present some aspects of my recent book, With Us More Than Ever, Making the Absent Rebbe Present in Messianic Chabad. And I'll focus on, I'll accompany my speech with a PowerPoint presentation. And since visual culture is part of the themes that I'm going to talk about, I hope that some of the slides will sort of enliven my talk. So look at the picture in front of you. Those of you who don't read Hebrew, the note on the door of this office says, soon I will return. And so this note, I think, encapsulates what I would call kind of Messianic time. In June 12, 1944, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Rebbe, the seventh Admor, or president, leader of Chabad, and the King Messiah for most of his followers, moderates and radicals, passed away. Since then, for the last 26, almost 27 years, Chabad continues, and I would say even thriving. Chabad is thriving in a very strange state, in an oxymoronic state, in fact, without a tzaddik, without the vital ingredient of a Hasidic sect. And the problem, or the question that in fact triggered the writing of this book was, how come? How Chabad is doing so well without a tzaddik, without a Rebbe? Or maybe Chabad is functioning with a Rebbe. And in fact, this gap between with and without, between presence and absence, is the gist of my book. I am interested in the wide array, very varied array of techniques, of means, of media, which Chabadniks use in order to make the absent Rebbe present, in order to bridge the gap between kind of mundane reality and a leader who passed away 27 years ago. And I believe that a major part of Chabad's success is related to this pantheon, arsenal of means and practices and techniques that enable Chabadniks to feel the Rebbe close, to make the Rebbe into an active participant in their behavioral environment, which I would define in my book as a Messianic ecology. So from a theoretical perspective, I would say that my work belongs to a cluster of recent works in anthropology and in religious studies, which all belong to what one anthropologist called the media turn. My focus is not on Chabad's history. I'm not a historian. I'm not a scholar of religious studies. I'm a social scientist combining psychology, sociology, and anthropology. So my focus is indeed on the tools of mediation and remediation, which I consider indispensable bridges or conductor to the sublime, to the sacred, to the transcendent. And in fact, the gist of the media turn is the awareness that these tools and practices that make and remake the Messianic ecology are not mere technology. they should be looked on a par with religious theosophy, with religious ideation. My focus is on concrete practices, on material culture, on all these means, all these media which bridges the gap to the sacred, and without them, kind of sublime moments of apparitions, of hierophany cannot be achieved. Let me say a word about my methodology. It's kind of a tripartite aspects of kind of collecting data. First, I interviewed mainly Israeli, and this is important to note, Meshichistim. Meshichistim is the term used by Chabadniks for the more radical groups in the movement, those who don't merely believe that the Rebbe is the Messiah. I still think that this belief is common to most Chabadniks, but on top of it, they also refuse to accept the fact that the Rebbe passed away 27 years ago, and they believe that he still lives in body and soul in 770 Eastern Parkway in Crown Heights, in Brooklyn. So these radicals, circles of Chabad were the focus of my work, and I made observations in their gatherings, in Messiah and redemption rallies, but more than interviewing Chabadniks and participating in their events, I used, unlike previous works of mine, printed material. And here one has to understand that Chabad has produced in the last generation a wide range of Messianic literature in a quantity estimated to be double that of everything previously written on Jewish Messianism since the Dead Sea Scrolls, Daniel, that you are dealing with until this very day. So in fact, this explosion of material made it, I think, easier for me to focus on content analysis of Messianic publications, mainly periodicals. And here you see two examples: Sichat HaGeula, Discourse on Redemption, which is a synagogue weekly, dealing with the portion of the Torah, the weekly portion of the Torah, and the other is Beis Mashiach or Beit Mashiach in Sephardic Hebrew. Please note that on the covers of each of these periodicals, a portrait of the rabbi is to be seen, and this is universally true. This is universally true. I kind of surveyed thousands of publications, Messianic publications, and I've never found one case in which the portrait of the Rebbe is missing. And I think that this is crucially important. Why periodicals are so important? First, because they are part of Chabad's popular culture. They are circled, they are distributed very widely. They reach thousands and thousands of people. And secondly, and perhaps more important, from my perspective, unlike historians, I cannot predict the outcome of this messianic surge, which occurs here and now. But what I can do, and this gives me a sort of an advantage, an edge, I think, vis-a-vis historians, is that I can study the Messianic imagination as it works prospectively rather than retrospectively. I can see how new techniques and means are added to this Messianic ecology, which enable Chabadics to live with the Rebbe week by week. So this is a few words about my methodology. Now let me say some words about the people I studied. This is still part of the methodological aspects of the work. And this is important because my book can be read as something that represents mainstream Chabad. It does not. The Meshichistim are a minority, a significant minority in Chabad. It's very hard to give an estimate. Partly because the boundaries between the camps are not, it's not a dichotomy, it's a spectrum, I would say. But sociologically, what characterizes them is that they are mostly present in Israel rather than in the United States, even though here too the boundaries are very flexible and people are moving all the time between Kfar Chabad and 770. They are younger, the younger generations in the movement. They are, many of them are new immigrants to the movement, either from other religious camps or Baalei Tshuva, people who were not religious before, and most of them, the overwhelming majority, have never seen the Rebbe during his lifetime. So these characteristics are important to remember. They are peripheral to the movement. Definitely from the perspective of the mainstream, but they considered themselves the avant-garde, the tribe of Levi, the Leviim of Israel, who, when Moses climbed Mount Sinai and disappeared, were the only tribe, the only group who remained loyal to the absent leader. And they make a clear comparison between the situation now and the situation which brought the golden calf to the camp of the Israelites in the desert. They are peripheral also in Israel. They are more represented in Bat Yam. Sichat HaGeula is a weekly that is published in Bat Yam, Ir HaGeula. Bat Yam, which is a plebeian city, town in Israel. It's not Tel Aviv. It's much less shiny. Still, this is the town of redemption. Givat Olga, another peripheral place, working class people, is Givat HaGeula when you change the letters. Goa in India, where many Israeli backpackers find Chabadniks looking for them, embracing them. Goa with an addition of the letter Lamed becomes Geula, etc., etc., etc. Many of these Mizrachim are of many of these Meshichistim, are of Mizrahi background, Sephardi background. And this is a fascinating phenomenon in itself. I don't have time to go into it, but one of my chapters in the book deals with a comparison between Chabad and Breslov. And I would say with some confidence that today, at least half of the Meshichistim in Chabad are of Mizrahi background, and the majority of the various sects in Breslov are Mizrahim. What we are seeing now is the emergence of Mizrahi Hasidic sects, something which is really, really new. I know that the time goes by very quickly and I can lose myself very easily. So Catherine, you should orient me if I'm still doing fine. Let me move to the second part of the presentation, and I'll focus on what I call phenomenology, the experiential world of these Hasidim, of these radical Hasidim, of these Meshichistim. And in fact, I would say that the major part of the book deals with this ecological or Messianic ecology, this behavioral environment which the Meshichistim constitute and are constituted by at the same time, and which includes this array, this arsenal of practices, of means, of media, which enables them to live with the Rebbe, as they say, and to live Rebbe, as they say, lichyot Rabbi, to live Rebbe, to feel that the Rebbe is close, and actively participates in their surrounding. And this varied array of means can be divided into three avenues. First, communicating with the Rebbe. Second, seeing the Rebbe. And third, being with the Rebbe. Of course, the boundaries are a little bit fuzzy, but for the presentation, I think it would be nice to make this tripartite division. Let's start with writing to the Rebbe. And one has to understand that this is a major problem for the Hasidim, because since June 12, 94, they cannot write to the Rebbe. Communication with the Rebbe was an essential part, not only of Chabad, of every Hasidic sect, and this avenue was blocked out after Gimel Tammuz, after this date according to the Jewish calendar. And it took Chabadniks about 6 months in order to develop this avenue to write again to the Rebbe and to get answers. This they do by a bibliomantic device, I would call it, or which they call Goral Igrot HaKodesh, the oracle of the holy letters. All the letters that the Rebbe has been writing, and he was communicating with the whole world, not only with Jews, not only with Hasidim, of course. These thousands and thousands of letters are being compiled. When I wrote my book, there were 32 volumes, maybe there are more now, which include the letters that the Rebbe wrote to other people in other times. One writes a petition to the Rebbe as before, but instead of sending it through the mail or by fax, she put it randomly in one of the volumes, opens it, and then he has 2 pages, 2 to 5, 6 letters, depends on the length, and you read and he looks for answers. And as you can imagine, if you look attentively for answers, you'll always get them. I don't have time to go into details, but let me assure you that people do get answers. And what is so amazing and in a way paradoxical, since June 12, 94, they get answers in a faster pace than before. Now you can open the book, everyone can do it, and read the answer on the spot. Therefore, they call it fax, Igrot Kodesh, the Holy Letters fax, or Rebbe online. And this is a recurring pattern that is the outcome of this arsenal of devices since the Rebbe disappeared. You can reach him quick in a quicker pace. He is accessible much more than he was before. Everyone can carry in his pocket a miniature volume of Igrot Kodesh and take it out and consult it. In fact, during some of my interviews, people opened the Igrot Kodesh in order to decide what they should say to me. So it made the Rebbe more accessible. This is one of the, I would say, unintuitive kind of outcome of his disappearance.
I would say about 5 minutes. About 5 minutes to go.
5 minutes. Okay, I'll be quick. The second avenue is seeing the Rebbe, and this relates to Chabad's visual culture, which is really something that I was surprised to track, because I would say that Chabad's visual culture today amounts to what scholars call iconophilia. It's really unprecedented in Judaism. The Rebbe, the portrait of the Rebbe, is the most visible, I would say, a rabbinical portrait in the 21st century. You can see him everywhere, and here you see some of the holy industry of where his portraits is coined. Look at the watch, which is really intriguing. I mean, having the Rebbe's portrait on the watch, it means that you're supposed to see him all the time. Look at his gigantic, let me see, at his gigantic portrait on a poster in a summer camp in Binyamina, in Israel, in a playground. You see the kids and the Rebbe. Look at the proportions. Look at this intriguing picture where the bride, instead of reading from the book of Psalms, hold stares, in fact, under the inuma, under the veil, stares attentively at the Rebbe's portrait. And the last one, this is one of the monthly kind of periodicals that ceased to appear. But look at the cover, which recurs on each and every issue of the volumes. Always you see a panoramic view of Earth, part of Earth, sometimes from a satellite or from a mountain or from a plane, and the Rebbe looks from above. You know, one picture worth thousands words, and it's a speculation, but I would refer this positioning of the Rebbe to an attempt to glorify him. The Rebbe as part of the divine, looking at us from above. And the last, and here is something I call meta-iconization. Look at the Rebbe's picture within the pictures. That's why I call it meta-iconization. And the Rebbe is always on my side. Being with the Rebbe relates to the endless traces and practices of embodiment that the Hasidim use in order to feel that the Rebbe is around them. Look at this poster. I don't know if you can read it. It's in Hebrew. It says that it's an ad for citrons for the festival of Sukkot. But look, these citrons are מצאצאי האתרוג של הרבי מלובביץ'. מצאצאי האתרוג. It's the offsprings, the scions of the etrog which the Rebbe used. I don't know if it's true or not, but in principle, it could be true. You could use, you know, the old citron and plant the seeds and create. So this is part of this department, which I call traces. It relates to indexical science, metonymical science. I'll give you very briefly another example, and then I'm jumping into conclusions. Look at 770 Eastern Parkway. Here, this is the original, right, building in Crown. It's this one. This is the one built, the only one built during the Rebbe's lifetime in Kfar Chabad, in Chabad's village in Israel. Okay, very, very exact replica. But then you have an arc shaped as 770, and even a puzzle for kids shaped as 770. And this is a facade of a private Hasid in Gedera, south of Israel, south of Tel Aviv, which is shaped approximately as the facade of 770. What is so important here is that these replicas can multiply endlessly, and they do. These houses are mushrooming, like in Israel alone, in dozens of places, and also in other places around the world. So to conclude, what we have here is a very intriguing combination, a synergy, I would say, between sophisticated media technologies on the one hand, something that Arjuna Padurai called technoscape, and Chabad's dialectical mysticism, ideascape, according to Padurai. And this mixture creates a virtual Rebbe who is hyper visible, much more visible than before. When the Rebbe was young, he frowned when people wanted to take his picture. Later, he changed his mind. But now we have endless pictures of him all over. So he's hyper visible. He's highly accessible. Everyone can have part in him. Everyone can write to him. You don't have to go through the Rebbe's secretaries anymore and wait a month for an answer. He is a multiple Rebbe because he can be reproduced constantly and in some cases endlessly, as I showed. And he's tangibly close, he's portable. You can have his pictures. And people do have his pictures in their pocket or in their wallet. I would use the word Nisa in Hebrew. Nisa is double meanings. Nisa is sublime, Ram veNisa, but Nisa is also like laptop, Machshev Nisa, portable. And the Rebbe is sublime, but he's very, very close using all this technology. And let me skip the democratize and go to the conclusion. The conclusion is that the Hasidim are right. The battle cry is correct. With us more than ever, itanu yoter mitamid. The Rebbe is now with the average Hasid more than he had been prior to the event, as they call it, of Gimel Tammuz, to his disappearance. But there is one drawback here, and this is the last point, the one before last. The Rebbe, Chabad is undergoing a process. I would say it cautiously, one cannot make predictions, but it seems that Chabad is going a process of democratization or decentralization, because now everyone can have part in the Rebbe, as I said before. The unity of the movement, who was compared by a noted Israeli historian to a Christian order, to the Jesuits, you know. The unity is in danger. We see cracks between Meshichistim and mainstream Chabadniks. We see some shluchim, emissaries who have their own almost autonomous kind of territories. So I think here is the danger, but otherwise Chabad is thriving through the means that I try to, well, some of them I try to present here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bilu. Now we turn to Daniel Falk, who will offer some comments.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed reading the book and your summary presentation. I find many fascinating details in your book that spark analogies and questions for the sectarian movement I study, which is the sectarian movement we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The following are just some reflections that come to mind as I read. I'm not looking for responses to all of these, but just things that generated, and I hope that they may spur some broader discussion. Since you began your fascinating book with anecdotes about your first encounters with Lubavitcher Chabad, let me start with one of mine. In 1992, so 2 years before the death of the Rebbe, I was in Israel studying for some months, and this is the first time I'd seen all these King Messiah posters plastered all over Jerusalem. And my wife and I were touring Galilee with a rented car and encountered two Lubavitcher students who were hitchhiking there, and we had a wonderful conversation and so on. The one turned to us at one point and commented that his friend is related to the Rebbe. It wasn't particularly close, but it was, if I recall, something like 7 degrees of separation or something. But it was clearly a point of great pride and awe in his friend. And the one that is related to the Rebbe turned to us and just very calmly said, "You may touch me," which I found really quite striking. So at first I thought he was just joking because we had a very friendly conversation, but it was clear that he was not at all. So this speaks to that importance of contact, right? And that connection and the sense of traces, and that it could carry some benefit. And I was also struck by the openness to non-Jews. We spent the rest of the day driving around together. And one place we went to was Tel Dan. We were up there on the plateau, and they were clearly not quite sure why we were there or what was important. And while we were up there, a tour bus pulls up below and unloads with dozens of members from a Black Southern Baptist church. And they start climbing up the stairs to the plateau. And as soon as the first one reaches the top, she turns around and starts singing the song, "We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder," and they all burst into this. When they get up to the top, the preacher starts telling the story in Mark chapter 8 about where Jesus is with his disciples at this, this is the traditional site of this event, where Jesus turns to his disciples and says, "Who do people say that I am?" And Peter responds, "You are the Messiah, the Christ." So here, and throughout all of this, of course, these two students, their eyes are like saucers, and they're wondering what on earth is going on. But here we have a clash of competing Messianic systems. And the other thing that I notice that connects very much with things that you're talking about is this collapsing of time and place. In that place, time collapses, right? So why is this church bus there? They are connecting to this place where Jesus presented his disciples with the existential decision. And the whole point is you are faced with that existential decision. Who is Jesus to you, right? So this raised a question for me: is that similar in Meshichistic Chabad about being faced with that existential decision to decide who is the Rebbe to me. So next about the group that I study. So I will refer to them as Essenes. I don't want to get into the discussion of who exactly were these people. This was a broad movement. They referred to themselves as the people of the New Covenant. It was a penitential movement, a Messianic movement, eschatological. They believed they were living in the last days before the revealing of God's redemption, but also living in the shadow of the absence of their teacher. Their teacher has died some time before. And I think comparison and contrast can highlight some elements that are, either common or distinctive. And in the background, I'm thinking of two. Why do they take the form that they do? And secondly, what contributes to longevity? The Essenes survive almost 2 centuries after the death of their teacher, but they don't survive the destruction of the temple. And I think we would have to say that the jury is still out on Messianic Chabad. It's lasted some time, but will it last 2 centuries, for example? How long can it last without a return of the teacher? So let me just highlight a few things about this movement. Their founding teacher is known as the teacher of righteousness, or the true teacher. He gave revelation of the true interpretation of Torah as well as esoteric teaching, and the community is very much attached to the teacher by their loyalty, and also divided by whether they're loyal or not to the teacher. But the teacher in these texts is a figure of the past. They believe that they're living at the time of imminent redemption. They have very high boundaries, so the teachings are not to be shared with outsiders. And in fact, one is expelled if one does. So this is a point of considerable difference. Their leadership is focused on a figure who's referred to as the maskil, an instructor, spiritual master, healer, exorcist, etc. So let me just take a few of these points. So the teacher of righteousness vis-a-vis the Rebbe. Both are living with the absence of the teacher in imminent expectation of redemption, which involves the revealing of the Messiah. But although the Essenes evoked the teacher of righteousness, there's no evidence that they emphasized the real presence of the teacher of righteousness. And as I ponder that, why not? He's not Messiah. He's a figure of the past. He is a forerunner figure, sort of like John the Baptist, I guess. They evoked him, they sought to emulate him, but not looking forward to his return. In terms of the community in the world, a very prominent difference is that Chabad is a missionary movement, very open, versus the Essenes, which are very exclusivistic. They are true Israel. All others, including all other Jews, are damned. But I pondered about boundaries, and I think there's perhaps a paradox here. Although Chabad certainly is more open to the world, it still seems that they have strong boundaries, and I just don't know the details. And how high are those boundaries, and what leads to the difference, and at what points is it permeable? In terms of their eschatology, as I noted, the Essenes expected the consummation of redemption within a generation of the death of the teacher. This never happened, but still they survived almost 2 centuries. And I wonder what your thoughts are about whether Messianic Chabad could endure indefinitely in this situation. Let me also point another feature that I found very interesting. You just mentioned it briefly, the idea of prayer as a virtual world, the role of ritual in collapsing time and space. And that made me think very much of one of the very remarkable texts in the scrolls known as the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice, which is a mystical set of songs in which the heavenly realms are dramatically visualized. Now, so this takes us also to the technologies of visualization. They don't have physical images, but through their songs and ritual, they very much visualize being there. But it's a different, the goal is different. It is not visualizing the teacher of righteousness or even the Messiah. The Messiah is remarkably unimportant in the system. He just has to be there in the end. But what is important is the whole community's divinization. Or angelification, as some have referred to it, as being a community together with the angels and being in the heavenly realms. So that's quite different as well. And so I wonder, again, both what some of these differences mean and also what contributes to longevity. And if I can add just one other point, if I have time, Catherine?
Sure, but we do have several questions coming.
Okay, good. So I'll keep this short, but on methodology and narratives, I appreciate very much that you clarify your investigation is focusing on the stories, that is the narratives, rather than the events themselves, and focus particularly on stories you derive from these two publications. That is a very important distinction. And studying the stories, these can tell about the nature of Messianic Chabad and its self-understanding. And the focus is not on trying to understand what happened, you know, whether there really was a miracle or whatever. But as I read these stories, I found myself pondering about the process by which these narratives are obtained and transmitted. Of course, in the academy, we have norms about how oral histories can be gathered, which I don't necessarily assume are followed in these publications. So this raises the question about what to make of these narratives. And I think, for example, of a number of the stories where you could sort of read between the lines that there's more to this story than meets the eye. And I have some examples, but I won't go into those right now. But I will note that religious narratives are typically highly stylized. One is not completely free to tell one's story. However, they have conventional shape and content. And so there is constraints on what is said, what is left unsaid. And so I would add that the nature of the story not only reflects one's self-understanding, but also shapes one's subjectivity as such. And so I think that how the narratives are secured and transmitted is also fodder for the story you're telling in this book. And I wonder if you've thought about that as well, how the socialization in how to tell one's story is also part of shaping who this community is. So I'll stop there, but thank you again for this book. Very fascinating.
Thank you very much.
So I'll read off a few of the questions that we've already received in. So the first sort of dovetails with what Daniel was just saying, and it's given your emphasis on visual culture and how the Rebbe is present in photographs, advertisements, and films, presumably some of those films have sound. To the extent that we see the Rebbe, to what extent do we hear him? That's the first question then, about the sounds or the voice of the Rebbe.
Okay. Shall I start answering,
I
or
think maybe yes. Well, or do you want me to read? Would you rather hear a few questions and then answer?
maybe I'll start with Daniel's points, some of Daniel's points, and then this question of, and then we'll go on. First of all, the personal attachment to the Rebbe, starting with your example of the evangelist you met in, is one cannot exaggerate how important it is for each and every Hasid. In fact, they would like to become the Rebbe in many ways. So they are kind of living incarnation of the Rebbe in many ways. One way, I think, psychologically, that they solve the problem of his absence is the fact that, well, it's up to us now to carry the torch. We, in fact, we have to emulate him, and in this way, enliven him. There is a phrase in Hebrew, le'akbil panim. Le'akbil panim means to come, Avraham come to see the angels, מקביל לפניהם. In a Chabad sort of, in a Hasidic midrash, it's lekabel panim, lekabel et panim, to concretely to get the face of the Rebbe, to become the Rebbe. They try to grow their beard as the beard as the Rebbe did, or to dress like the Rebbe. So yes, this personal attachment is extremely important. Some of your comparisons with the Dead Sea Scroll, there is the sect of the Dead Sea Scroll is very interesting. I don't have time to go into it, but as you mentioned, one of the major differences is Chabad is as universalistic as a Jewish religion can be. They have their boundaries, in kind of incorporating another question that you raised. They do have their boundaries. They, in the world to come, when redemption emerges, the boundaries between Jews and non-Jews will be very solid, very solid. It's not, but at the same time, they think that they believe to be their mission should be brought to entire humanity. In fact, you know, the 7 laws of the Noahite laws, Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, is taken very seriously by them, and they address non-Jews with even Palestinians. You know, they are located on the far right kind of side of the political spectrum in Israel, and still you can see posters in the West Bank kind of beseeching Palestinians to accept so they see them as also part of the catchment population in a way. And of course the sect was not like this. I mean, the group was very, very secluded, and the boundaries were very, very high. About hearing the Rebbe, yes, I mean, seeing him is the major sense. The visual sense is the major one through which they contact him. But in some cases, I collected, the book describes about 80 cases of apparitions of the Rebbe, not dream apparitions, but during wakefulness, and in some of these apparitions, the Rebbe's voice is heard. The Rebbe was polyglot, he knew many languages, and some of these apparitions include the whole array of these languages, from Russian to Yiddish to English to French. But this is not the major kind of central track through which the Rebbe's messages are conveyed. In some cases, I would add, even pictures of the Rebbe are being heard. People hear the Rebbe speaks from the posters. It's very uncommon, but it is part of this experiential world of the Hasidim.
Okay, I'll read off.
Let me. Can I interfere? Delia, you asked me to make predictions, and social scientists are very bad at predictions. You know, well, in the humanities it's not better. We know how to interpret the past, but when we try to predict the future, we usually we are caught empty-handed. But I don't know how long this Messianic surge will continue without a Rebbe, and they are not going to appoint a successor. This is very clear, at least at this point. It might change. But you know, the analogy with Braslav is illuminating. Rabbi Nachman passed away in 1810. He had died 30 years before the first primitive cameras started to appear. So the Hasidim lost his image. We don't have an image of Rabbi Nachman. Still, throughout the centuries, Braslav survived. On the brinks, it was always a very small Hasidic sect, despised by the other sects, very divided. But in the last generation, Braslav has a cultural blossom, I mean, in Israel and also outside of it. And Rabbi Nachman became a cultural hero. So some of these movements can be quite immune to these kind of problems that we from the outside consider as impossible.
Yeah, I suspect that's why you have this emphasis on the religious imagination. It can compensate for many, many, many things. So here's another question. Would it not be fair to say that before we compare Chabad to the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Sabbatian belief in a false Messiah was at least as widespread in the Jewish world as compared to the Meshichistim?
Meshichistim, yes. Yeah, this is a very good question. I mean, this comparison kind of it should be asked, and I consider the Messianic surge in contemporary Chabad as the first major kind of Messianic surge in a mainstream religious movement in Judaism since Shabtai Tzvi. So I think that people, because we live with this messianism right now, we don't have still the historical perspective to evaluate it and to understand how unusual it is in many ways. You know, the Messianic idea is a major ingredient of Jewish religion, but messiahs are looked at in a very ambivalent way. And Shabtai Tzvi is one of the reasons in the modern period, at least. The Sabbatians, the Sabbatian movement was bigger than Chabad, relatively speaking. I mean, during 1666, 67, every second Jew in the major centers of Judaism in Europe, in the Middle East and in North Africa was Sabbatians. Sabbatians were called the believers. The others were called the kofrim, how do you say it? The heretics. After he converted to Islam, it changed, of course. But yes, this comparison should be made, and there are many points of comparison which I make in my book.
So here's another question. Looking broadly at religions, is what Dr. Bilu demonstrates about Chabad unusual at all? Whether it's concepts of a very present God or Jesus for Christians, or the non-Messianic Jewish belief in Torah and a Redeemer to come, do not religions overall depend on the use of diverse modes of making real what, to those who are not members of the group, is not real at all?
Excellent question, and I would add that yes, the answer is yes. You're right, and in fact, I should have said that my prime kind of interest was not Messianism per se. I'm not a scholar of Messianism, but I considered this Messianic upsurge in Chabad as a golden opportunity to study various religious mechanisms which under or during kind of the, in daily mundane reality of everyday religion are buried under, very, very deep stratum of conventions and rituals and prayers and commandments. But Messianism is an extreme case of how the religious imagination works. And in fact, in accord with this question, it's not only the comparison should be made with Christianity and with Shiite Islam, because in either case, a phenomenal religious failure. I mean, the Messiah dies as a thief on the cross, becomes dialectically the emergence of the greatest world religion. I mean, the biggest world religion. And with the Shiite Islam, the same process. I mean, the Imam disappears, but the Shiite continues. And in fact, utilize this failure dialectically in order to reinvent themselves. So this is part of the dynamic and of various historical moments in the life cycles of religions.
Okay, here's a related question to a one asked earlier. The Sabbatian heresy was extremely successful in spite of not having the advantage of all these media accessories. And the scholarly consensus is that this was the result of theological misconceptions deriving from the Lurianic Kabbalah that had then become so popular among the masses. Is there a theological explanation for the success of the Chabad Messianism?
Well, first of all, one has to remember that the Sabbatian movement's success was impressive, but very short-lived, very short-lived. Once he converted to Islam, the movement continued, and in fact, it exists until this very day in a very, very kind of attenuated form in Turkey. But it didn't last long as a mass movement. Is there a theological explanation? Well, as I said before, the Messianic, the idea that the Messiah is supposed to come in the future is a basic tenet of Judaism. Even Maimonides, who was not mystically oriented at all, put it as part of his 13 principles as a major one. Of course, we are waiting for the Messiah. And so this is the theological explanation. The point is that because of this ambivalent history of messiahs in person who caused catastrophes upon catastrophes in Jewish history, the rabbinical opinion about kind of saying that the Messiah is here as specifying a certain figure as the Messiah, pointing to a figure, specifying a date. No, this is not what we should do. Messianism is important, but it's open-ended. And I would say that this would be to the Rebbe's credit, that he was ready to test the limits of the most noble of all Jewish ideas of all. So the kind of theology is very solid. Very few people would try to bring it into a critical test. The Rebbe tried.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'm sure Yoram Bilu will stay around if anybody else has questions they would like to ask. But please, everyone, join me in thanking Professor Bilu for being with us today and sharing with us his really fascinating research. We wish you much inspiration in your research to come, Professor Bilu.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel, for very cogent points.
Yes, thank you as well. I mean, I just found lots of points at which makes me rethink the significance of certain things, right? Because of course, any movement has options, and certain paths taken go in certain directions.
Well, could I ask a question? I didn't want to intrude, but I was interested, in the issue of place, that this 770, and how I'm wondering to what extent has there been, you refer to them as being sort of transnational and this tremendous openness and not many boundaries. But yet 770 seems to still have quite an important place for them. Can you speak about, is the Rebbe, how does place affect, to what extent he's more present or not?
Oh, 770 has a tremendous importance for Chabad, particularly after the Rebbe's disappearance. It was always the Chabad's, kind of major center, epicenter. But since the Rebbe moved to the building and lived there after the death of his wife, he moved to his office and he lived there. So the building became identified with the Rebbe. It's another representation, embodiment of the Rebbe in a way. And since the Meshichistim believe that the Rebbe is alive and well in 770, they maintain their daily routine with the Rebbe there. So it has a really immense importance, in fact, a cosmic importance. They believe that if you ask Chabadniks, where is the Shekhinah after the destruction of the temple? They would say here in Beit Rabbeinu beBavel, in the house of our Rebbe in Babylon, which is Brooklyn nowadays. And I heard people, there are some stories in the book about people going to ask for remedy at the Kotel, the Wailing Wall, and fail to get it, and go to 770 and are cured in 770. And the subtext is very clear. You see, who has the upper end? It's not the Kotel, it's 770, which seems a terrible heresy to many Orthodox Jews who look at Chabad again with ambivalence. It's one of these paradoxes in Israel that secular Jews consider Chabadniks as the realization of ideal Judaism, while Orthodox Jews don't share this idealized view. But 770 is part and parcel of the third temple, and when the Messiah appears or reappears now, according to mainstream Chabadniks, it's a second coming. It's a belief in second coming among mainstream Chabadniks. Then the temple will come out of heaven, will land at 770. 770 will become a portion of the third temple. They will go up and to the Holy Land with the Rebbe and the rest of the people of Israel. This is the path to redemption. This is how it will occur. So 770, you can't exaggerate how important it is, despite the transnationalism and the fact that it has endless replicas all over the world.
It's just fascinating. You're right. It's paradoxical, counterintuitive, and a spectacular illustration of religious imagination.
Well, Chabadniks are very special.
They are. Well, they're lucky to have you studying them too. Daniel, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, so if I may ask another question, I left this one out, but the phenomenon of divinization is fascinating. You know, I think to many people, they would think that's incompatible with Judaism in general, and that's a Christian thing, but it isn't. I mean, Christianity doesn't emerge out of nothing. I mean, the seeds for this sort of possible divinization is there before as well. We you know, the exaltation of Enoch in some traditions, and you know, so the possibility of that is certainly the aspects of God as well, like wisdom divinized, and you know, so I think there's all sorts of rich stuff that's going on that this is tapping into, and it doesn't have to rely on just strange things that happen recently.
I wholeheartedly agree, and again, I think that this is a test case for this dormant aspect of Judaism, which are undercurrent, but in extreme circumstances, like this liminal period from 1992 until today, they come out, they erupt. And when you ask mainstream Chabadniks, they would say that these are the lunatic fringes of the movement. But I don't think so. They are a minority, but I can see the rationale. You can see the dynamics which almost forces the Chabadniks to go in the Christian track, in a way. And they are very conscious. They are very historically conscious. They understand this comparison. They try to avoid it, but it's almost as if it's imposed on them, because this dynamic of a Messiah that had lived and died, and his death is kind of refuted, almost by necessity creates these circumstances. So yeah, you're right. It's not, it's there, it's dormant, and it erupts from time to time. Judaism is not immune from kind of making messiahs into godlike figures.
Yeah, I like your language there, dormant, and that's how I view it. That you know, Christianity, at least the early Jesus movement, it was activating things that were dormant, and so I think it's a bit of a red herring to try to always trace stuff back as though, yeah, is this dependent on Christianity? It doesn't need to be dependent on Christianity at all. They can independently activate things that are there.
Right.
And then when you add to it your emphasis on like new technologies and new media, I mean, you can make all kinds of things really feel present. And when a person,
you know, this is extremely important in the widespread of today's religions. Part of the success of evangelists in Africa, for example, is clearly related to these films that are very lively. And, you know, one takes it in a virtual world, one takes it as a very, very lively reality. And yes, you know, it makes a fascinating question. I addressed the question to you, Daniel, as well. Do believers in the 21st century as an epistemological advantage over believers during the time of the sect you studied? One can say that technology facilitates, you know, the process, and on the other hand, one could say that it cripples the religious imagination, that you don't need it. I mean, people believed in gods before they had pictures of them, even though, you know, all the icon industry in Christianity, I would define it as a heroic, desperate attempt to make the absent present.
Yeah, I think in answering that, one could ask which is better, the book or the movie. Have different answers, right?
Great.
Arguably, putting it into pictures limits the imagination. Like a horror movie, not seeing the monster and reading about it can be much more terrifying than once you portray it on the screen.
Let me add to it one thing that I mentioned in the book. As I said, I studied 80 cases of apparitions in waking time, and they are very disappointing. And this, I think, this is related to your points, because of their kind of bold ontological belief that the Rebbe is alive. Their epistemological boundaries are bounded, are limited. When they see the Rebbe, it's always a picture from the past. It's never a picture of the future. And when you look at these apparitions, which in Marian apparitions or in Christian cases, they are really fascinating. The imaginaries here are much more elaborate and broader. Mm-hmm. So this is really part of this question of book and the book or the movie.
Can I ask you another question? So sorry, Lior, did you have a question? I don't want to hog all this.
No, I think that maybe we'll add it as a bonus track to the YouTube.
Well, it's just so fascinating. But I do have another question, which is kind of tricky in a way. You allude throughout to you being embraced in a sense, like in a sense, your interest in the phenomenology and publishing these accounts and so on, they view very positively. But I wonder if that also gave you some pause. What is used from just repeating these narratives? Ones that I wondered about were cases of people who rejected medical advice because of these methods. The hurricane story, where people decide to stay in their house because of the answer they received back and so on. And so the stories are not neutral either. I mean, they're not just purely religious. They have people make life decisions, which are in some cases, it becomes clear, life and death decisions. And I wonder about the cases where things went wrong, decisions which were made where things don't turn out. Those stories don't get told the same way. So I wonder, like, did you wrestle with that? I mean, scholars have to wrestle on the margins of what they're studying, but they have to have parameters.
Right. Yeah. No, it's an excellent question, and I really I wasn't grasped by it at the time. I studied, as you said, narratives, not the events as they occurred, but there is a darker side, of course, which I kind of, in a conscious way, didn't go into it. It might be viewed as a moral debacle, as a moral problem, yes, this is something that should be addressed, but in a different genre, I would say. One cannot encompass everything. If I would have written my book from a critical perspective, it would be it was a different book. It was it was a little bit dissonant for me to incorporate it. But I mentioned at least the ethical problems that I tackled, and there were others, because unwittingly I became a shaliach myself. I mean, Chabad they are so sophisticated that I found. I'll give another example, which just an anecdote. Some Meshichistim approached me and asked me to write a piece in a Messianic publication for, I think, the 50th or 60th year of shlichut, of emissaryship. And I said, yes, I will do it on one condition, that I write it from my perspective. I respect you. I will not despise you, heaven's sake, or for heaven's sake, but I will write it from my external perspective. And you publish it as is. And they said, yes. And they did publish it. And then I got a phone from a friend who asked me if I became a Chabadnik. They published it as it was, but everywhere where I mentioned the Rebbe, they said, Melech HaMashiach Shlita, שיחיה לאורך ימים טובים, אמן. כלומר, with these two words, repeating two words, they made me into a Meshichist. And I was pissed off. But then I thought that they have to contain me as well. So I left it as it is. But there are moral issues here that I perhaps avoided, not in a heroic way.
All right, I think that on that note, we will conclude this lecture. Thank you so much, Yoram. I'm finishing the recording.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and I didn't have to leave my office in order to be with you on campus. It's wonderful.
Could we have had a better illustration of principles you talk about in here?
That's right. Yeah, I was thinking that even in the beginning. You're quite present, even though you're absent.
Here is my side of the story.
And mine as well.